I don't like competition. I hate competition. I just want to do a good job, and I think in this industry, that's what people shoot for. I mean, I think we pride ourselves as being bike people. You know, we take a lot of pride in the industry. You know, and it is a very community. You know, so. When I was young, I started working in a bike shop in my late teens, and I worked in bicycle stores in Chicago from around 1980 till 91, 92. And then I moved to Michigan, and then I started working in bicycle manufacturing. So I worked in bicycle manufacturing for about 10 years, and then spent a couple years in the motorsports industry, and then opened a bicycle store in 2003. So in 2000, I want to say 5, a guy I knew in the bicycle industry, this guy Rick Vaughn, came to visit me, and he brought in this bicycle that was called an ERB, Energy Rebound Bicycle. And he was trying to convince me that it was a good product to sell at the bike store. Well, when I worked in bicycle manufacturing, I had seen similar products and I was familiar with it, and it was called Slingshot. So I told Rick, I'm like, that looks like a Slingshot. And the thing that was unique about a Slingshot bike is it had a cable as a down tube, which is one of the major supporting parts of a bike frame. That was my first involvement with where Alter started. And then after that, I explained to him some of the shortfalls of it. And then Mark Grendel, who was the inventor of Slingshot, and me met up a couple weeks later, started to talk and came up with some ideas, and that was kind of the beginning of Alter. So what makes it different is that unlike suspension bikes in the past, they would always have a lot of complicated pivots, bearings, things to make the bike, the frame of the bike move. So what we came up with was a system where actually you got rid of that. There was no weight penalty. You were able to, we had an interchangeable down tube. So what was normally a fixed part of the bike, we actually made it so it could be taken out and replaced with a different piece, which would, the thicknesses, depending on how thick the piece is, was about how much flex the bike would have. One of the big problems you had with suspension bikes is, number one, they were very complicated and hard to maintain. Number two, they added weight. And in the bicycle industry, weight is a very big concern for bicycles. So what we did is we solved two of the biggest problems that suspension bikes have had in the bike industry. Because it's pivotless, that means that there's no pivot, so the frames, the tubes, are drawn so that they're designed to bend, okay? And which, if you look at a regular bicycle, people would be really worried about that. They're like, oh boy, the tube's gonna bend, you know, isn't that gonna break? And I would show them, I'd be like, well, look at the fork on your bike. There's two unsupported tubes that are just flopping around. So, you know, no, they're not gonna break. But if you weld the things in the wrong area, if you move the position and when it's gonna be from what our finite analysis was, we did show that it will fail. So I want to say it was maybe 2010, we brought it to Interbike, which is the largest bicycle show in the world. And we introduced it there, and we got rave reviews. We got, by 5 magazines, one of the best ideas of the year. And tons of interest from bike shops and dealerships. After doing all the design and engineering, I ended up going to China. The main city I was in was outside of Shanghai called Nishi. I was there for 28 days. I worked with a factory there, but I also traveled around to many other cities, Zilong, Ningbo, meeting with different manufacturers that we could partner with long-term down the road. So I met with carbon fiber manufacturers. I met with other factories for frames. We also had in development a lot of parts and accessories that we were going to launch at a later date. Well, what we had is we ran into a problem during the manufacturing of the frames. We had raised a fair amount of money, and we had some additional people brought on board that made some critical errors with the manufacturing, engineering, and design aspects. The position in which the tube was going to connect to the other tubes was in the wrong spot, because when we had our drawings translated from English to Chinese, they made decisions that they just weren't qualified to make. And in the process of that, we had 1,000 frames made that were made incorrectly. And I was of the opinion that all those frames should be destroyed and we should just rebuild the run. It was expensive. It was about maybe, I think, around $100,000 mistake, but it was. I didn't see it as being any other option. But that decision was overridden. Oh, so once I had found out that they were not going to demolish the frames and rebuild it, I was awestruck. I couldn't even believe it. It was an option that I didn't even think existed. Because my opinion is that in any business, if you do it right, you'll be successful. And when you start taking shortcuts, it's just the highway to failure. And that was the most critical bad decision of any company I've ever been involved with. What had happened is that we ran into delays. We were building a new type of bike that factories had never built before. We had proprietary parts. The timeline that we originally launched with changed. And everybody was worried that we were behind schedule. And my opinion was that our investors weren't investing in a timeline, they were investing in this industry-changing technology. The biggest thing we can do is to live up to their expectations. And I can explain being late. I can't explain making a critical error like that. So what happened is not to blow my own horn, but when I left, it stopped. I developed the whole idea, the whole concept, and there was nobody there. Had the avenues already lined up, ready to go. And so the people that came in, that this investment group brought in, had no bicycle experience. Once again, the decisions they were making were just bad decisions. So what happened is they just burned through money. Well, the problem is when you run out of money, you're in trouble. And they didn't, a lot of the places that were committing to bikes contacted me. And I would never talk negatively or talk about the reasons I left the company. All I said is that it's not a bike that I would stock in my own store. And these people that I knew all knew me from years of experience of selling bikes, and they were like, wow, that says a lot. Well, the funny thing is that at our very last meeting, I think they thought they had a lot of leverage on me. I took no money from the company. All I had was ownership of the company. I had shares, a lot of shares. And they kind of came into that last meeting because I told them, I'm like, I don't think I can do this. We need to have a sit down. And they were all ready to kind of be like, well, thinking I was frightened of that. And I sat down and I'm like, you know what my dream was ever since I was a kid? And I told them, I'm like, it's to own a bicycle store. And I'm like, you know what I presently do? I own a bicycle store. I have a great business that goes well, that I like. I can, it's so much easier. I can walk from my house to work. I can ride my bike, So I'm not leaving this company with nothing else going on. The bicycle company was always secondary to my bike industry, but for several years there, I was working at the altar 5 days a week and at the bike store 2 days a week. I couldn't believe that, all the time and effort that we had put into that, as I always say, stepping over dollars to pick up nickels. You know, I mean, trust me, people, they don't know. I really have never told anybody the reason why I wasn't involved with the company. This is really the first time outside of just a handful of people that I know. But yeah, because I was like, you know what? They don't need to know. All they need to know that it's a product I wouldn't sell. I went around and told them this is going to be the best thing you ever do for your bike shop. And then once we crossed that line, I'm like, I'm not going to sell the bike in my store. And they'd ask me why, and I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm not doing it. So they canceled their orders.